Hi, everybody, and thanks for attending today's webinar, Custom Resources, the Building Blocks of Your Cookbooks, which is our first webinar in the Chef Infra Best Practices series. My name is Raisa, and I'm on the marketing team at Progress. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. If you have any questions, you can submit them in the Q&A section at any time, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any additional programs or browser session running in the background, as webinars are bandwidth intensive. And finally, as always, this webinar is being recorded and an on-demand version of the presentation will be available to you in next couple of days. Let's go ahead and get started. Over to you, Dan.
Hey everybody, today I'll go over building custom resources, what you want to do with building those. So I'm a senior developer advocate at Chef. I've been around the Chef community for probably longer than I'd like to admit, probably sort of getting on for 7 years now, and I've recently just joined Chef. Today we'll go over building a custom resource, why you'd want to build them, and when you should use them. We'll go over a community cookbook called Apache 2, just because it's got a ton of really nice examples, documentation, and a bunch of testing in there. And if we're lucky, we may even get to the Spec integration testing at the end of that as well. So a guide through the custom resources at the moment and how to implement them. And then finally, we'll do our next steps, and then we'll go through our Q&A there. So at the moment, we've got a few on-demand webinars. So preparing for new Chef Infra client releases with Cookstyle. If you haven't seen Cookstyle or haven't used Cookstyle, it's a great way to build in Ruby COP linting into your cookbooks. It can help you upgrade between Chef releases as well. So you can say, I'm going to Chef release 16 and target all the Cookstyle rules of that and say, yep, let me know where I've gone wrong, what things I need to improve, and that webinar will go through that for you. There's a configuring Chef Infra and compliance with the new built-in compliance phase. So if you're into compliance and you really want to see an inbuilt compliance phase in the Chef Infra client, there's that on-demand webinar there for you. And there's also a testing Chef Infra cookbooks with Docker. So we to chefs as well, we use Docker quite a lot, and we'll go over that in that webinar there. And today we've got our custom resources. On June the 9th, we've got automated chef deployments with GitHub Actions with Jason, also from the sous chef community. He'll go over how they use GitHub Actions to deploy, release, test their cookbooks there. They've got over 160 cookbooks, so they've got a pretty massive estate of cookbooks. And that may be helpful for the people testing at scale there. And on June the 30th, we've got building immutable infrastructure with policy files. So if you've been using Burks files for a while and you want to move across to policy files, this is a great webinar for you. Cool. So custom resources are usually a great way of reusing built-in Chef resources for tuning the way you want to. Sorry again. So if you've got a website you want to create and you've got a number of directories you want to do, and then maybe some folders you want to put on directory, some folders and some templates, then a custom resource can wrap all of that logic up in a nice sort of reusable way. Custom resources will also let you inline write Ruby code. So if you want to chmod or chain a directory, you could just shell out or use the built-in Ruby resources there. So we'll go over that a little bit there, and how Ruby, Chef, and the built-in resources can work to create an overall custom resource that gives you an application cookbook. There are three basic parts of custom resource. There's declarations of the properties that the custom resource accepts. So usually there'll be a name property, and then let's say a version number you want to install, and that will tell the internal resource what you want to do. Then we load the current value of the properties if they already exist. And then finally, there's a definition of the actions. This is where the meat of the actual customer resource comes in, and this is where you start doing the implementation. So usually you'll have like an add or remove action there, and we'll see a couple of examples of that with the Apache Cookbook. Okay, so I've kind of gone over like what the basics of custom resources, why would we want to use custom resources at all? Well, they're really nice and simple to create if you've used LWRPs before or definitions. They're a much nicer way of writing reusable code for your colleagues or the community to reuse. And they're a really nice way of wrapping up your expert's knowledge of how to install something. So let's say you were installing an Apache web server and you had a specific way of setting up directories. You can then set your policy to say the HTTP directory should always be 644, or it should always be owned by Bob and not the www root. You can specify these rules and this way of writing them in the custom resource, and then your consumers, another team can come along and say, I just want to install Apache 2, and all of the complexity of how to install it has been done by your automation experts. You can also target multiple platforms, and again, your third-party team who are going to come along and use your custom resource can say, I just want to install Java on my Windows box and my Linux box, and I don't really care how I do it. I just want Java version 2. Now, internally, you can say, right, well, on Windows, this is how we install it. And on Linux, this is how we install it. But our customers only need to say, I want to install Java. So with Chef, late versions of Chef 15, 16, and 17, we've started using unified mode. And we'll see this a little bit in the Apache 2 cookbook, and it's basically a one-liner. And it allows us to make put Chef into a more predictable manner. So we used to have a compile and converge phase. They're two separate phases. Now we out of the box say we're just going to run one phase, and that makes it easier for users to say, right, this Ruby is going to run here, and then the custom resource like directory is going to then run, and it's all going to run in the exact order you expect. Before, you would have to pull values out of the Ruby code and then do some funky stuff with it, and then eventually it may run, and then it may not run in the exact same way you expect it to, and then sometimes you'd have to force things as the compile phase. And as you can notice, my arms are waving around a lot here because actually it's really confusing for the users, and often it's even more confusing for the people writing the custom resources. Unified mode gets rid of that and says, right, we're just going to run this in this exact order, which is super nice for maintainers. And as this slide says, it's really simple to enable this. You just put unified mode true in your custom resource, and that enables unified mode. If you want to stick for now with the non-unified mode, you can just put unified mode there false, and that will stick with the old behavior. Bearing in mind, in Chef 18, this will become the default behavior. We'll just say unified mode will be true by default. And another really nice thing, kind of alongside unified mode, is resource partials. We won't be seeing this today. At some point in the future, we'll be going through the HA proxy cookbook and how we use partials there. But it's a really nice way of sharing properties across multiple resources. So let's say you had a version number in or an extra config block that you wanted to add to resource A, B, and C, but not D. You can just say include resource or include partial into each of these things, and we will pull through those properties. It's much like an include require relative, really. But we'll go through that in a webinar. But yeah, it's really nice. And as I say, it's a quick demo time. So let me just quickly see if I can go find my Google Chrome window, and we'll start the journey. Right, so today, like I said, we'll go through the Apache 2 cookbook. Here, this is just a sous chef cookbook, but you'll see we've got the usual layout. We've got files, libraries, resources, spec folder, and we've got our templates, and we've got tests. It looks like a pretty standard cookbook. One thing we will notice here, we haven't got a recipes directory because we don't need recipes when we're writing custom resources. Recipes are like the way we would consume custom resources. Let's quickly jump to resources folder, and this is where you would typically start writing your custom resources. And we'll jump into the install resource. So this is where we said, right, I want to install Apache 2. I need a bunch of properties. I need to configure these things. So here we say, right, I want to configure the Apache package. Users will usually not override this, but let's say the user will come along and say, actually, I don't want to install the one that's installed by default by the package manager. I want to install this other one that's a custom one. And this way we can override the behavior, the default behavior of the cookbook. So let's say we've got the property, which we accept. And then we've got the property of Apache package. And this is a Ruby type here. So this can be string, integer. We can even have classes here. But usually most of the time you'll say things like string, integers, arrays, and hashes. Those are the kind of the four most common, and maybe true and false to the Boolean. In fact, let me just quickly check if we don't have a true or false in this one, but I'll jump across to the Samba cookbook, which I know has one, because of course there's always one kicking out somewhere. So this one accepts true, false, and string. So if you want to have multiple Ruby types, you encase those in an array and say, I'll accept true, false, and true, false in Ruby are different classes. So you say, I'll have a true, I'll have a false, and I'll also accept string here, which is really nice. And for the Apache package, scroll right to the top again. We have a default, so you can set defaults. A lot of the time, there'll be strings. In this case, we go out and we go and pull the default from a library method, which will explain. I'll go over it a bit more in detail in a little bit. But based on platform, we say, right, if you're on Red Hat, we'll do one thing. If you're on Debian, we'll do another thing. So that's why we can sort of extract our complex logic, or logic that would increase this property by like several lines. We'll just dump that into a library helper. This also has an added benefit of being easily testable, which I will also go over later on, which is nice. And the final line here is just a description. So it's a really nice way of describing what this property does. This is mostly helpful for maintainers going forward. Like, okay, fine, what does the Apache package do? I want to remove this. I don't know why it's being used. Well, description here is helpful for maintainers to come along and say, right, well, if I'm going to install the Apache package, then I'll do this, fine. And I guess the final benefit of this is you can literally just copy and paste this into your documentation later on. So you've already got your documentation in line, which is nice. And here we've got the example of a unified mode being turned on here, and that's as simple as it is with unified mode. Okay, we've got some other things here. So custom resources documentation is just being rewritten at the moment, but we've also got other properties we can set on, other methods you can set on a property, things like coerce, so you can force an integer to be a string once you do that, or you can force a yes into a true false, or yes no into a true false. Do that. So you can change those properties types. But there's a full list of the methods you can set on properties in the custom resource TSL documentation on the website. We'll go over later on. So that's pretty much all there is for the properties section. So it's quite simple. And this just sort of says, I accept this kind of type. and then you'll put a nice little description field at the end of that. And the meat and the bones of really custom resources are the action sections. These used to be two separate files. So everything above the action would be the resource, and the provider down here. This provides the actual meat. This provides the functionality to the resource. So here we're just using a built-in Chef package, the Chef package, and we're going to install two packages here. One is the Perl package, again, a method, and then the Apache package. Now this is a special way of saying, I want to grab the Apache package that we've defined in this new resource. So wherever possible, try and use new resource. You can always use current resource. There's some interesting scoping things there. Ideally, by default, you should probably just use new resource dot and then your resource name. So here we were using Apache package, and that refers to the property package above there, and then the version here. So if we've specified an Apache version, then we'll pull that from the new resource Apache version there. And then we can do some nice Ruby here. So if the version is empty, then we don't set it. So version number, unless the new resource Apache version is empty, and that either sets it or just the line doesn't exist, which is nice. Again, a directory, and then there's a number of directories here, kind of standard Chef stuff here, and then a number of templates. So we've got a template resource here, and you can see this is all stepping through in order as you would really expect. Now here's where we go through the reusability section. So specifically for the Debian section here, if we're on the platform for the family Debian, so this would include Ubuntu and all those kind of derivatives, then for Debian, we also put a Cookbook file on called the Apache module conf generate. This is actually a really nice Perl script. You will never hear me say that twice in one day. A really nice Perl script for generating module comps for us. Just throw that over there. And then there's some really interesting with RunContextRoot. I'm definitely not going to go over that today. That's kind of a more advanced topic, but when you're using accumulator patterns or wanting to throw things into the root of the run context, then you want to use with RunContextRoot here, generate a module list. So what we've done here is say, if we're using Debian, do something else. If we're using FreeBSD, do something. So the end user doesn't need to know that on Debian something else happens. On FreeBSD something else happens. All they need to go and call is the Apache 2 _ install resource, and this will all automatically happen for them, which is always very nice. So I don't think there's anything else interesting in here apart from all of the methods that we're going through here. But firstly, we're going to go and jump through the documentation hoops. So let's close that down a second. Yeah, open documentation up. So documentation is a really crucial part of writing cookbooks. It explains how to use the cookbooks, or it should explain how to use the cookbooks to end users. Those end users can be internal customers. So let's say you're an enterprise and you have an internal chef team who are experts at writing, let's say the Apache 2 cookbook at this point. How do I use this? Well, the install resource, how do I use the install resource? Well, a really nice pattern is to have a README to say, I support this number of platforms. So the following platforms are supported. If you didn't support OpenSUSE Loop, just admit that. And then, any notes you can put there, and then some example usage. This usually I wouldn't suggest is a full usage scenario. You might want to say, point them at your test cookbooks. So test cookbooks are great ways of documenting how to use your cookbook. Let's say you want to install a module in a particular way. Well, actually, if you support installing modules in a particular way, you probably want to have a test for that. So again, test as documentation, which is super nice there. And here we've got a list of resources, and this is the section I would suggest we kind of borrowed this off Microsoft. So Microsoft, the pioneers are doing this with their macOS cookbook. And they've just got a nice section here that says, these are the resources that we've got documented, listed here, and they just take you to the documentation directory. So we've got a full-on Apache 2 documentation folder with all of the documented resources. We don't have all of the mods here because they've all got a really similar set of documentation. So we just sort of picked the main ones out here. But as you can see, they're all pretty nicely laid out. What this gives us, so if we, instead of putting the Apache 2 resource documentation in the big README, you split it out into its own README file. And the reason for this is it just ends up being nicer to read for users. So I've just got a description here, and then the properties it accepts, and these should match what's in the custom resource. And a couple of examples. So this is how we would say, like, setting a different status URL when we install it. And let's say we want to pass in a new template cookbook, because it turns out I don't like the templates that the Apache 2 cookbook suggests. Then, well, we can just pull it right in. Here's a more convoluted explanation. Let's say the npm worker conf needs a lot of extra tuning, and this is how we do that. Like the minimum maximum threads here, we want to go and tune and those kind of stuff. So we can do that. And that kind of goes for every resource, that you want to document them as well as possible. And you'll see there, the more documentation you've got, the nicer it is to use, and people will come along and use that. Let's just jump back quickly to the resources here. In the cookbook, scroll. So we've got this Perl package. This Perl package is just a library helper. And these library helpers are ways of extracting Ruby code or simple or complex logic into separate places where you can easily test them. So let's go find out what the Perl package does here. Well, actually, this is a super simple one. It turns out the Perl package changes based on platform name. So if we're on FreeBSD, it's Perl 5. If we're not, we're on Perl. And then the default Apache package here changes based on platform name, because of course, no one can decide which platform the Apache package should be. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways of referring to the Apache package, which is funny now we're looking at it, but it's actually quite frustrating if you're the user and you want to go, oh, well, I just want to install the Apache package. Well, I think it's like this on Debian, always something different on Red Hat, and oh, if I'm on Arch, it's just Apache. This is where we extract that logic away, and it's really nice and clear. Now, what you want to do is you want to namespace this really nicely. So default Apache package, you won't want to say default package, because library helpers are all squashed together in the chef namespace. And when you include these library helpers, if you include library helpers for multiple cookbooks, they'll all start overriding each other. So here we've got default Apache package. You might have default Redis package or default Samba package. You want to namespace this pretty nicely. And it's pretty simple. You just pop the cookbook name in there and you'll be good to go. One thing I haven't mentioned is how these library helpers get into the cookbook. And it's a magic line right at the end of the file called action class. And action class is usually where you would put your Ruby helpers. It's just a block of Ruby code that you can put a bunch of logic in. And that's fine. There's just methods there. But if you end up with multiple methods, let's say more than 2, maybe more than 3 in a push, this section starts getting really large. And you can see with the helpers directory here, the helpers file here, we've ended up with lots and lots of helpers based on platform name, based on platform version, based on what day of the week it is. then we just push this into the libraries file. Another reason why you want to do that library file is you can then test each method. You can just treat this helpers file like a standard Ruby file if you want to, and say, I'm going to load this up. I'm going to load the chef dummy class up and say, right, well, the Apache config directory here. Right, well, if I'm on Debian, I expect Apache 2. So you can go off and write a test for this really nicely. And it's much, much simpler than spinning up a full cookbook and saying, does that test out? Right. Let's close that down a second. Let's see if I've missed anything else. No, I think we're good there. So before I move to testable, I'm going to show you a really, really gnarly library helper called default modules. Our default modules now looks quite simple, but actually there's a number of different modules you've got there based on platform. Red Hat has the most extra modules because they've just compiled in and say, yeah, these are our sensible sets of defaults here. So Red Hat and Amazon are both on systemd, so they use the systemd module for Apache, and that makes it work on Red Hat 7 and 8. But actually, a user really doesn't want to know what the default module set is. It just needs to know that when I install Apache 2, are the modules that are enabled by default sensible, and does it actually stand up? What we can do here is jump to here. Yep, different modules. We can write a test for this. So say we've got a spec directory. So if anyone's come across chef spec here, we've got a default module spec here. So we've got such a jump into the overall design here. So we've got our root directory, jump down into the spec directory, and then we've got libraries and resources. Here's where our libraries are tested. And each of these library helpers has got its own class, its own Ruby file to split it out. This helps us document. We've got this number of methods, library helper methods here, and we can say, based on platform, I expect these things to happen. This is just the default modules test here, and you can see why we'd end up with just a file for each of these methods, because actually this is already 60 lines long and is almost unreadable. Now, if we put this in with the other helpers, we could totally do that, and it would totally be readable, and it could kind of be maintainable. But I now know that if I'm in this folder with this file, I'm just dealing with the default modules, or the spec for the default modules. So I'll take you through from the top here. So we've got a require spec helper, and what this does is require our spec setup. So this is just a spec helper. So we require chef spec. That's the testing tool we're using here is chef spec, and we're using Berkshelf because when we boot the cookbook up, we need Berkshelf to resolve all dependencies, and then we need the helpers, and then a bunch of other basic gumph, and then we've just kind of turned the documentation format around because that's our preferred way of outputting it, and we like the color formatter. There are a bunch of other RSpec configuration here, but this gives us a nice default list, and I'll show you that running in a second. So let me just clear my screen, and there we go. Cool. So that gives us RSpec. RSpec is now set up, and chef spec's been loaded. That means that we can test out, and that's all happens in that single require spec helper line. So first thing we do with RSpec is we're going to describe the default modules method. So hash and then default modules with default mod. This describes what method we're going to try and talk to. And contexts are just nice ways of separating out sections of tests. So we support systemd and systemv. So for each of those two contexts, we've got a different group of tests there. And for systemd, we set an attribute, an automatic attribute called init package. Systemd, what this is doing under the hood is exactly what OHI would be doing. So OHI goes away and finds out if we're using systemd or sysv or initd or any of these init systems and sets the init package. Well, here we're going to set it manually because we don't have OHI running for us. We're going to say, right, we're using systemd. And then we're going to do, this is a really nice trick here, so we can actually go. I thought I'd got away with that, but no, my camera decided that it was not going to play ball today. We put the recipe DSL. So we're going to do recipe do and end. And then we're going to include the cookbook helpers. So we're going to pull those helper methods in. And then we're plainly just going to log whatever the default modules outputs. So this is going to output a string. And so log is just going to log a string here. And then again, context, so you can nest contexts. And for the Red Hat platform, we expect these. And this may look long-winded and long-handed, and it's so we expect all of this horrendously long log line to be written out. Now, when we came to write these tests, we started writing the tests first before the libraries. And what we did here is we installed the package by in package, and then we said, right, I want this number of packages installed. So these modules installed by default. So when I come to log this stuff out, I expect these 17 modules in this order to be enabled, which then means that we can go and refactor and rejig our method how we like, and that enabled us, or enabled me, in fact, in this case, to write this reasonably nice case statement with a bunch of default modules. Originally, this was just, if you're on Red Hat, have this list. If you're on Arch, have this list here, and they were full long lists. However, with unit testing, we can narrow this list down, and we've found out a default set of modules. It turns out the Red Hat had 3 more packages than default. Turns out Arch had, 4 more packages in default, and Arch had 3 more packages in default. So unit testing here gave us a nice way of saying, right, well, we know what our end goal is going to be, so we can iterate and make sure this method works really nicely. And we haven't got a stand-up chef here at all. We don't have to stand up test kitchen or any of these kind of big testing tools that require a full node to run on. We can just run this in memory. However, I did kind of lie a little bit there and say we weren't going to load up Chef. What this does here is load up Chef client and load up the whole recipe DSL and a bunch of other stuff. And it's quite heavyweight. As you'll see when I run the unit test in a second, it can take a little bit longer. And by a little bit longer, I mean 2 seconds rather than a split second, because there's a lot more libraries to load in. So we've got Red Hat here, Fedora, Amazon. This is kind of the way you would see most of your tests written. And again, if anyone wants to go and see this, this is over in the Sous Chef's Apache 2 cookbook. They got some really nice examples over there. Another way of writing tests is, let's see if I've got a nice example. The default cache route. So this is one we don't actually load in the whole Chef client. We just stub out some things. So in this case, we stub out the platform family helper. So default cache route, if we're on Debian, SUSE, or FreeBSD, the cache directory. So the cache route is cache directory plus the proxy, and everywhere else it's mod cache disk. Don't ask me why, but Apache likes changing things for every different platform. However, this isn't the problem here, because what we can do is say default cache route. And before every one of these, so this is a usual RSpec standard, RSpec setup. Before each one of our tests, we receive the platform family method and return platform family, and we set platform family for every route. So when we're running with Red Hat, we set the platform to Red Hat, or RHEL in this case, and I expect that method to return var cache httpd mod cache disk. And you say, Dan, why is this useful? Well, this actual string is made up of two separate methods here. So we're testing var cache httpd actually got written out at some point, and then mod cache disk was passed back. So we're testing we're expecting default cache root to equal, so .2 equal there, and then we're just going to pass mod cache disk. There's a number of other sort of RSpec standard tests you can write here, so to match and those kind of things. This is a really nice way of testing your library methods here. So you've got quick iterations on your complex logic. I'm going to quickly jump across to showing you if my new share button will work to my terminal. And we're just going to run delivery local here. So this is just chef exec delivery local unit. Under the hood, it's just running RSpec against the directory. And so delivery local unit is delivery in local mode. And it just goes off and finds a toggle in the local directory and says, right, what do you want me to run in the unit mode? And then in this case, it's just RSpec with the directory. However, I'm lazy and I can never remember the RSpec invocation, so I just run chef exec delivery local log because I always run that, and it's dumb testers. Yes. So you see these are running pretty damn quickly for each of these methods. And these are all platforms, so we have multiple platforms, multiple modules here. So we've actually run 288 tests here in 38 seconds. And if I was on a Mac M1 Mini, I'd probably be running those in about 12 seconds because it turns out Mac M1s are super nice, and now I want one. So you see like a bunch of those tests just span by. Those are the ones that are just RSpec, loading in and stubbing things out. They run incredibly quickly, but you don't get the full chef client. And that might be a thing you want to do. You may not want to stub out the entire chef client, or you might just want to say, right, well, this method just accepts the word yes or no, and then returns foobar baz, or yes, no, true. Now, that doesn't require any chef resources or helper methods like platform family, platform version. If you don't care about any of that stuff, you can just run normal RSpec against these methods here, which again gives you really, really quick turnaround time on your writing your library methods. And Benny, how much time do we have left? Because I can either go into...
You're at about 40 minutes long so far. I'd say it's either now or you can do a couple more things. We've got a couple of really good questions if you want to switch over to those.
I think we'll go into questions actually, because I can probably ramble on a lot more about testing. So I've got a couple more things to show about testing, and I probably will just quickly skimp over them.
Cool.
So Test Kitchen, we'll go over Test Kitchen at some point in the future. As we mentioned, testing your cookbooks with Docker. Sneak preview, Docken is our way we do it in this cookbook. So our kitchen configuration with Docken's there, and our kitchen configuration is there. And then once we spin those up, we've got a number of test recipes. So we've got our test cookbook here. And you say, Dan, right, well, we've got our resources. How do I invoke them? Well, I was going to say, this is how I would do my basic site. Apache to install, start a service, enable some modules. This is how we get it, and this is where we would point people to our users of our cookbook to say, custom resource. This is how you'd write a cookbook, full end-to-end cookbook. And this will get you an actual site at the end of the day. So, hey, just go here and you can go and see how you would use this stuff. Cool. I'm going to stop sharing and stop rambling, and let's get on to the questions. Lazy wrapper. Yeah, let's go and do that. Yeah, so lazy wrappers are super interesting. Usually, so lazy wrapper is a thing that's hopefully going away. In fact, unified mode allows you to sort of load things in the correct order. Before unified mode was a thing, and before pulling things in from library helpers, you would want to lazily evaluate the result of a method there. So lazy brackets, and then see if I can go bring that code back up, because I'm pretty sure I know exactly where you go. So this lazy block here, probably easy to show you some code. This lazy block here waits for this to be evaluated before it gives you the default value back. If you don't evaluate that lazily in non-unified mode, it just does not work. Sometimes in unified mode, it doesn't work either. And I'm yet to get to the bottom of when and where that happens. That's probably a core Chef problem. But basically, if you're relying on methods to give you back a string or a default value, you probably want to use lazy there. Try it without lazy first if you're using Chef 17 and unified mode. If it doesn't work, then just wrap it with lazy mode. But lazy here just lets you write methods really nicely. Cool. And Larry, yep, so I'll go into that one as well. So with unified mode enabled, do we still need to use the lazy evaluation? Answer is sometimes. Ideally not. But in a few cases, like I said, it just isn't. It's designed to work that way. I've seen a few cases where it doesn't work that way. But yeah, fingers crossed in the future, it will go away. And if I want any more details on any of these, feel free to just either jump on the Chef community Slack or just ask again, and I can go over those again in a second. So unified mode is just for custom resources at the moment. So there's a theory of recipe unified mode. That is a completely separate topic, and it hasn't been implemented yet. So we're just talking about unified mode for a particular resource. So unified mode, I don't think I was really very clear there. Unified mode is on a per resource basis. So let's say we've got the conf resource, the config resource, and the install resource there. I can enable the unified mode for some of them, all of them, but you get to choose on a per resource basis at the moment. So yeah, you can say on this one custom resource, I'll have unified mode off because actually I want to rely on this really weird old behavior, and I know it works wrong right now, but I don't want to fix it. And actually adding unified mode true breaks it, and I don't want to have to reorganize my cookbook. But yeah, it is just for custom resources at the moment. And Asif, yeah, there is a way of generating custom documentation for custom resources. It's the let me just find the Chef Resource Inspector. The Chef Resource Inspector should be able to do that. I haven't actually got it to work recently. I probably need to go and pester Tim, who's helped write this in the past and does this, but there's a Chef Resource Inspector for pulling documentation out of custom resources, and then you should be able to throw that into it, throw that into your markdown there. I think that might be it. Feel free to ask any more questions whilst we're here. Great, thank you. Asif, so is there a blog article or document on how to use Chef Resource Inspector to generate docs? Not yet. So yeah, that's probably going to be on my list of things, once I figure out how to work it myself, there'll be either a blog post and or some documentation to write that, because it's a really nice piece of tech that should be able to just pull your resources out. But let me just see if I can. It's a kind of a hidden command within the chef command, which I will have to get back to you on. We'll probably put a blog post out once that documentation's out there, because it sounds like a couple of people might find that handy as well, apart from myself. Cool. If there's no more questions, I am going to jump back across to my next steps. I feel like there's a bit of a whirlwind tour there of the Apache cookbook. But if anyone wants any more information or any more like guides on how to create custom resources, there's two great places. There's a general place on the Slack community, the general channel, the Slack community channel, or the Sous Chefs channel, mostly because they basically written half of the cookbooks in the community at this point, or they now own them because people have kind of gone, I don't do chef anymore, or I don't write as good custom resources, or I want some help with these kinds of things. And those bunch of people there are really good at answering custom resource questions, mostly because there's a pretty, that's the thing they do day in, day out, is they write custom resources. So if you need some help with that, they can probably give some tips and tricks. Let's jump back across. So yep, we've got a really nice new chef learn chef course called Extending Chef Info with Custom Resources. I've recently gone through it the other day, and I think it's an excellent course. Even if I am the team that wrote it, I'd say it's a blooming great course. If any of the stuff here has gone over your head, then you can take this at your own pace, and there's a nice exam at the end. And Chef Client 17 is now available. This brings across a bunch of really nice new improvements. As you can see here, Tim is extremely excited. As was I thought these balloons were fake when he did it. But we've got over 300 pull requests merged. There's a bunch of fixes in there. Nice new resources and improved resources. And one of the biggest things is compliance phase. So you no longer have to have your compliance cookbook to pull through compliance. And now works on Apple Mac M1s, which is super nice if you want to target M1s. There's PowerShell core support, that's a pretty recent nice thing, and FIP support, which includes Ubuntu and PowerPC. If you want to stay up on top of the releases of InSpec and Workstation and InSpec and all those kind of things, then the discourse.chef.io is the best place to go. That will we post pretty much every release there, unless someone forgets to. But every release there is posted, and it's really nice. And the full change log. So if you want to see what happens in the Chef InSpec 437, the full change log will go in there, and that'll help you upgrade as well. And finally, we've got ChefConf September the 7th to September the 9th this year. And if you want to go and join us at ChefConf this year, that'd be great. Just jump over to chef.io/campaigns, ChefConf 2021, save the date, and yeah, register there. Cool. Thank you very much.